Hey, so welcome everyone today. I'm so grateful to be joined by Julian Peterson. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's really nice to be here.
Yeah, so as I told you before we started rolling, I definitely, you've done a couple of podcasts. I want to make sure we hit new territory. But for anyone that doesn't know who you are yet or what you're up to, could you give us just a quick
Yeah, absolutely.
intro?
Yeah, I'm Julian Peterson. So right now I'm working on a project. I'm the founder of a company called Essay. It's a writing platform, and it's based on my dad's. My dad's Julian Peterson, and he developed this philosophy for writing when he was teaching undergraduate students at Harvard and the U of T, and he had this document that he produced that was helping his undergraduate students create good essays because he found that their writing was certainly of less quality than their intellectual ability, right? So it seemed to him that our ability to teach writing through high school and early university was very limited, and so people were generally much further ahead in their development of knowledge than their ability to present it. So he wrote this document that kind of outlined a structured way of putting together ideas and then iterating on them to turn them into something that was coherent. And I was working on a different project that was kind of similar. It was an online university project. And then we eventually pivoted into turning that document into a writing platform so that kind of that strategy for writing could be applied in a much more widespread manner. And so we could build on those ideas and create a platform that would help people learn to write. So that's what I'm currently doing. But as far as kind of my history, I did my undergraduate degree at the University of King's College in Nova Scotia in philosophy, contemporary philosophy and music. It was a combined honors degree. And then I realized that, well, I actually already knew when I started the degree that I wasn't probably going to end up in academia and I wasn't likely to become a philosopher. So I kind of went back to what I was very interested in when I was growing up in high school, which was more computer-related learning. And so I went and did a college program in software engineering and ended up doing front-end software development. I worked for a company called Kinetic Scientific, which works with high-end racing yachts. So like I don't know, $100 million carbon fiber, 100-foot racing yachts, and I built interface software for them. So basically like screens with buttons that they click and the doors open or the lights turn on or the winches turn or whatever. And so I did that. I'm still doing that as a side project actually.
Oh, cool.
But it's pretty infrequent at this point. There's not very many $100 million racing yachts, and so it's not something that is a very frequent thing. So I did that, and then I was a software engineer at a few different companies in between that before I started Essay, which I've now been building for 3 years, and we just launched in April last year. And it now has had 125,000 users, and we have almost 10,000 subscribers, and it's growing very well, and we're pretty excited about it. So
Yeah, huge progress. Amazing.
yeah.
So, and I told you I'd ask you this because it's the burning question on my mind. What's the deal with SA and maybe AI, or how does ChatGPT and that whole wave kind of factor into this? Because you haven't spoken much on that yet, so I'm curious.
Yeah. So it's been it's funny because when we launched Essay in April last year, AI writing was not particularly relevant. It's so funny. Like, I mean, certainly the tools were starting to exist, and you know, I was aware of them. But in the last like 6 months, it's become, you know, everywhere online, and the tools have become very impressive. Now, if you go to our marketing page at essay.app, you'll see like right now our main headline is "You don't need another autocorrect," because the whole idea behind our platform is we're not really a content generation platform, right? Like, so AI writing is really about speeding up content generation and taking and making it easier for people to get their ideas into something that's presentable in some way, right? And so the whole idea behind our platform is that there's inherent value in the creative process, right? And so you actually have to write, and then you have to examine your writing, and then you have to change it, and you have to experiment and play and edit and rewrite and do all the things that are part of improving your ideas and improving writing. And that's where the value is. The value is only somewhat in the outcome of the project, right? I mean, it depends what you're writing, of course. If you're writing an email to someone, soliciting them in some way, then maybe the content is the most important thing. But certainly learning how to do that and learning how to write anything that's of value, it's the process is transformative. And so the whole idea behind essay is kind of a doubling down on the value of that transformative process that writing is. So actually the rise of AI has been very useful for us from a marketing standpoint, because we're not exactly against it. I wouldn't go that far, because I think that there's a lot of value in it, and perhaps we'll even find a way to make it integrate into our ideas without undermining them. But we're kind of an anti-AI writing platform, because we really believe that you should write for yourself and develop your own ideas through the process of writing. I think that the rise of AI writing will open up a big space for companies that are doing a couple things. One will be identifying whether the writing is AI or not, right? And so you're already seeing those companies come up, and that's going to be big in universities and high schools, and making sure that people are doing the work that this teachers want them to do. So that's the one. And then there's also going to be, a certain tool set for people that want to write and want kind of advanced tools that are kind of on the cutting edge, that are helping them develop their own creative process. And so that we may investigate both. We're certainly doing the latter, and we're likely to investigate the first part of that as well.
Yeah, because one thing for me that I wouldn't say I'm necessarily an advanced writer, but when I was writing my book, my editor was the biggest help, because I had someone else's eyes on my stuff. So once I was at a point where I could somewhat write a document, I wanted feedback.
Right, of course.
And so that's the part where I'm wondering, is there, maybe it's not AI, I don't know, but if I'm getting better at writing using essay, is there a feedback piece, or is that something that's on your radar around
it's something on our radar. We don't have a feedback feature at the moment. That's likely something we'll add this year. I think it's important. We haven't developed the features that we want to for use in schools and stuff, and that's going to be a huge one for schools, obviously. Especially for people who are, for any writer, right? Even the best writers, their editors are like their best friends in terms of the content. Like Stephen King in his book, he praises his editors no end, and all the authors that I know who are successful have really, really good editors who are a huge part of it. And also not just editors, but like a community of other authors and writers that exchange work and give feedback and that stuff. So that's a huge process. And that's also something that these AI tools they might be good for. They're obviously so new that you can't say definitively they're good for one thing or the other, but that's something that they're reasonably good at, is you can feed in a piece of writing that is fairly complex, and if you ask it the right question, then it will tell you various ways that you could improve it in various ways. So like the grammar, certainly, spelling, but also as they get more impressive, they can start to, I guess, critique the ideas as well and help you work through them. So I kind of like that. I've seen people use ChatGPT to generate not essay questions, but exam questions. So they say, I'm doing an exam on biology, and maybe they type in the topics, and then they'll say, can you ask me 100 questions about this? And so that's a really cool way of using it, right? So it's getting the AI to ask you to think and give it feedback, and then use it as a feedback mechanism instead of a content creation mechanism. Using AI as a content creation mechanism kind of rubs me the wrong way, because I am a big proponent of creativity, and that feels like it's stealing creativity or undermining creativity in some way, that getting AI to do the creative work for you. But using it as a feedback mechanism, that seems less problematic in that area to me.
Yeah. Yeah, like well because then you can also iterate with the feedback of the AI, but it's not running the show
Right, exactly.
in a sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So then what is on the roadmap for SA over the next, I don't know if you can share, maybe.
Yeah, sure. I can
But
talk about that stuff.
what's kind of up for the next, let's say, year or so?
Yeah. So the first thing that we're releasing that possibly today. I'm not sure. I mean, certainly by the time this podcast goes out, it'll almost certainly be out. Is we're releasing a whole new kind of like home page where all your work is kind of organized, and so we've introduced like a folder structure and progress tracking features and that sort of thing, and a whole new UI for that area of the site. So that's imminent. It's already built and tested and everything, so it's just a matter of getting it out. So that'll be really cool. I think we have some users with like 250, or I think we have someone with like 500 essays, and we don't like have a very sophisticated way of organizing work, and so he just has like a super long list.
Yeah.
And like you can search, but that's about it. So this will make it a lot nicer to actually do more, well, certainly a wider variety of projects and have them organized, but also longer projects and kind of have it broken up into pieces and have it more maintainable. So that'll be very useful. And then we're building some features around like keeping people accountable. And so like daily word count features, for instance. So a lot of people want to write for X amount of time a day or X number of words a day. And so we're going to build some features that allow people to set goals on their various projects and then either get notifications or get rewards perhaps for completing those goals and like streaks, that the sort of gamification element that a lot of apps are developing to help people meet their creative goals. So that's probably the next one. And then we're going to be building tools for the sort of kind of tools I alluded to earlier for educational institutions. So the ability to have teachers and students or group accounts so that people can provide feedback to each other. Features that allow that sort of feedback mechanism, so commenting and that sort of feedback, possibly some collaborative editing in some way, although we have some technical hurdles to overcome for that to work. The way that the app works its like most unique feature, I guess, is the rewrite tool. So that like it allows you to take a sentence that you've written in your paragraph and click it, and then you can create variations of that sentence. And so you create, countless variations of a single sentence, and then you can click it and view it in the context of the paragraph. And so it allows you to experiment with really reasonably significant edits without losing anything. But the fact that we have version history on that localized of a level means that it's hard to keep track of that when it's more than one author, because if you like remove a period in the wrong place, then it's hard to keep track of where those versions of the sentence should be, and you don't want to lose that. And so we have some work to do to figure out how to manage that from a data perspective. But those are some of the things that we're working on. And then there's like other small things like our like exporting ability, so being able to export to like Google Docs or PDF or things like that, make it easier for people to use it in a more professional way.
Yeah, nice. Some big changes.
Yeah.
I think
it should be. We should make a huge amount of improvement this year. I've expanded our development team.
In a new office, you said.
And we have a new office soon. And yeah, a whole bunch of things. And probably we'll hire at least one more person this year. So going from 2 to 6 in a year. So it should be a major leap in productivity and hopefully in terms of functionality for our users too.
Yeah, so then, I mean, that's huge too, just for yourself in terms of, okay, starting with coding, which is really a kind of often solitary endeavor,
Yeah.
where you're kind of doing your own thing, to having this team and managing. I mean, so how has that sort of been, and especially, again, more technical to business also minded and thinking that way, so.
Yeah, it's different. It's different for sure. I didn't have a huge amount of knowledge on how to run a business. I've always been a decent, natural leader, and so I kind of understand how to work with people, and I'm a good communicator, so that worked well. So my skills, like a lot of developers, are somewhat introverted, or at least if they're not introverted, they're
They'd rather
the
avoid
engineer
people.
mind is exactly. They're usually not people. It's just the way it is, and so I wouldn't say I have the normal personality for a software engineer. Although I think that stereotype is somewhat outdated, probably, because there's a lot of software engineers now.
Yeah,
like it's
true.
not
It's
it's not the
flooded.
90s when like these were everyone who went to a computer science degree and well, anyway, they were all introverted engineers. Like that was the way it is. And now, you have people who are educated in all sorts of ways, or self-educated, and I'd say that personality profile is probably a little bit broader than it was in the past. But even so, it's probably most software engineers aren't super interested in being project managers, or it's not a natural progression. But I like it quite a lot. It's been good. And with this project, I've kind of always been in that role. I've done a lot of coding too, but I've never been the primary developer on this project. I've always just kind of chipped in like on every level of it, and sometimes full time for a few months, but then I always have to go do something else like design work or business work. And the business part is the part that I'm still like struggling to understand, like tax documents and the
All
tax
the fun.
documents.
All the fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's fun. Like I'm enjoying the part of the business aspect that's about like projections and financial goals and how that will impact whether we can hire or where the team should expand. And that sort of high level business decision, I think, is interesting. The creative element of it is fun.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I've been enjoying that.
a lot of strategic thinking and
Yeah.
planning and getting a sense of the lay of the land of the industry, like you just described, and then being
Yeah.
able to kind of navigate, okay, where do we want to be within
Right,
this
right,
space,
exactly.
and how do we carve out our
And
niche?
the writing world is crazy right now. Like I didn't, certainly when we got into this idea, it was not nearly as crazy as it is right now, right? There's like 10 different AI writing apps coming out like every 3 days. You see them on Twitter. It's like new, x.ai. You can like type in your question. It'll do exactly the same thing that ChatGPT does, but in a document. It's and Microsoft just released AI features too, right? So now you can, they just announced this yesterday, right? And so now in all Microsoft's tools, you can ask Copilot to write for you, basically. So it's gonna be a weird thing. And I think one of the things we will likely do in response to this whole transition into AI writing is one of the cool things we have in Essay is we have a very detailed data set that shows how you wrote your thing, because we have these tools related to, like, they're proprietary tools, and so you can't like recreate them in any ways. Like we can see like, okay, you rewrote this sentence X number of times, and you reordered this section, and you did this, and it's not really possible it'd be very difficult to get an AI to replicate that. So I think one of the things we'll do is we'll offer the ability to prove that you wrote a thing. In some way that is a little bit more transparent than, let's say, another AI tool that says, yes, this is AI, or no, this is not AI, which is what you're seeing a lot of, which is also useful. But that'll be a competition between AI systems that are like detecting each other. And so you can never be 100% sure whether it's accurate. But you can be pretty sure that, like, if you can see someone's entire process. So let's say like I'm a student and hand something in with Essay. This is a future idea. We don't actually currently have the ability to do this. We have the data, but not the actual feature. But you could actually say, well, this student spent X number of hours on this project. She wrote this sentence 10 times. She wrote this sentence 10 times. We could show like a timeline of the development of the project. We show how it was written. So that, I think, will be a good tool for teachers to be certain that the student is doing the work properly. So
Yeah. Well, and also interesting probably for the writer in a sense.
Yeah.
Like I would want to know that about myself. Like, are there sections that I'm struggling with, and how are spending more time here versus, like
It'd be
I would
useful
want
to know, especially in like something like a book where you're rewriting a lot of it a lot of times, but you don't really remember. I mean, sometimes you remember which parts you've written like 50 times, but the parts that you haven't rewritten 50 times, maybe, like, it's hard to remember which ones those are. And it would kind of be good to know. It's like, oh, I haven't spent a lot of time with this particular section of my work. Maybe I should give it some more attention before I call it a finished project. So Yeah, that's a good point.
100%, because I think it's a lot of companies now that have a lot of data are trying to sell it or give it to people that'll pay for it, but the end user can benefit so much as well. Like even just the word count goal that you have already now, right? It's like, yeah, that would have benefited from somebody making sure that I was writing enough every day.
Yeah, and it's actually a much more friendly financial model for a company to operate on. It's like you use the data to first offer value to the user. Their own data is of value to them. That seems like a really good idea. And it's like selling it is, well, obviously if the product is free, then the data is the fee. And that's something we're definitely not interested in that as a product because it's just kind of sketchy.
Yeah.
And so it'll be cool to use the data in order to inform the user better about their writing habits and hopefully help them to create a better product and then also on the education side help a teacher better evaluate a student's progress in writing.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important, and I like that you're bringing it into the classroom because I had paper and a pencil like when we were in school.
It's so hard to be taught to write too, and even in any way. Like I'm not suggesting that the software is going to be like the thing that teaches kids how to write. It's really hard to teach anyone how to write. But even if it can offer anything in that area, right? Like even if it can offer the teacher a little bit of an easier time giving better feedback, right? Or evaluating the process a little bit more effectively because, for good writers, it's more about the content. So you can, mark the grammar or the structure or the story or whatever. But for a poor writer where it's really difficult to follow any of those things, right? And the grammar's bad, the spelling's bad, and it doesn't make any sense. It's like, it'd be really nice to know at least how much work the person put in. Maybe they tried really hard. Or maybe they tried like 10% harder than last time. That would be even a good thing to be able to measure as a teacher. Because those are obviously those are the students that never learn to write because you can't give them good feedback. You just have to, it takes way too long. It's way too hard to give them any positive feedback at all. So that'd be a cool problem to solve.
Yeah, and you'd see where they're struggling, right? Because if they are rewriting that sentence 10 times, then, hey, okay, what,
right, maybe
what
you can
here?
sit down with them and say, like, why did you choose this particular rewrite amongst these? Why is that? Why did you decide that was better? Maybe you can have a conversation about sentence structure or whatever.
No, definitely
it should be informative in some way.
100%. And so who would you say, because you've got 10,000 users now, subscribers.
Yeah.
So who are they now? Like, what are you finding in terms of who's using this and how they're enjoying it?
Yeah, so it was a funny thing because, it's a beta, and so it's not one specific group of people, and we haven't marketed it directly towards one specific group of people. We're in a kind of a weird situation from a marketing perspective because of my dad and the fact that we have some access to his vast connection network. So when we launched Essay for the first time in April 2022, he mentioned it on Joe Rogan in January 2022, and I in a huge rush set up a MailChimp website in an hour. I was like, oh my god, we need to get these people on a list somewhere. So I made essay.app. I made it into a MailChimp sign up page that was nothing. It just took emails. And we got 35,000 people.
Oh yeah, just
on
a
a
few.
mailing list. So that was a crazy start, and we I think we collected their occupation and name or something. I think that was the list of things that we collected, and when we launched, so we had that in January, and then when we launched in April, how we launched was we kind of just sent it to first 500 of those people, and then we were kind of testing our service to see if the whole thing was going to crash because we'd never had more than 100 people use it at the same time.
Yeah.
But anyway, we rolled it out to 500, and then 1,000, and then 5,000, and then eventually I think 20,000 people, and it was just kind of a cold email because it had been 4 months since they had signed up, and we hadn't really said anything because we were really busy trying to get the thing ready to launch. But crazily enough, 80% of those people went to the website and created a free trial.
Wow.
Which was a huge percentage. That is, I was expecting 10%.
Yeah, I mean.
Right? 10% is actually quite good.
Yeah.
But 80% of the people that not even that opened the email, it was like we got like 28,000 people from those 35,000.
Wow.
And they didn't buy anything. Some of them did, but a relatively high proportion of them bought something too, which was great. So that was like a shock, first of all, because like percentage-wise, it just seemed extremely unlikely and was extremely unlikely, and kind of was, I don't know how much it says about anything I was doing or any other than the fact that people are interested in new writing projects generally, and they also, like my dad has a lot of trust. And so I think that any project that he's involved with has some implicit trust, and we were beneficiaries of that. But the fact that a lot of people bought it and we are growing still, I think is good evidence that the product itself was worthy of some of that trust anyway. So our users are very eclectic, partly because of that. And so we have journalists who are writing on it. We have teachers who are using it in their classrooms, but more in like a more casual way because our feature set doesn't really align with the classroom at the moment. With ministers, quite a few ministers writing, because they write weekly essays often, which is something I just hadn't considered at all before, that we'd have ministers using it. But that's quite cool. So that's actually a very perfect use case for our app at the moment is sermons. So we have a pretty large group, and they're very active users. So that's a relatively big group. High school students, undergraduate students.
Yeah.
Really, it's a pretty broad group. Parents using it like for homeschooling their kids. That's been fairly common as well. But a lot of people are enthusiastic about it. People are using it not like in terms of our like almost 10,000 paid users, like not like a crazily active thing, right? But it also, most people aren't writing all the time, right? Most people, like even who use something like Microsoft Word, either they're using it for work like every day, or if they're using it as a side thing like on creative projects, it's whenever they have a creative project. Mm-hmm. It's not all the time. So it's hard to gauge in some ways how active a certain subset of those people are, but we have a decent group of active users who are giving us good feedback and helping us shape the product.
Yeah, but that's tough, right? To choose which features to focus on when there's so many different needs.
Yeah.
Because it's not just teachers, it's like
almost
everyone. So how do you prioritize?
That's been hard. Like I set up this site, it's called roadmap.essay.app, and it kind of allows people to give feedback and have requests for kind of the things they'd like to see as part of the platform. And we've been asked for everything. Like people want it to be like ChatGPT and Microsoft Word like combined. And now that exists, so they don't have to worry about that anymore. But like everything, right? Because it's a word processor. So people want every single feature that exists in word processors that they've become accustomed to. But luckily, we do know what we're building and kind of where we want to compete. And it isn't with like Google Docs and Microsoft Word. We're not building a comprehensive word processor. First of all, because those things already exist and they're good, and you don't need a formatting tool. People have got great formatting tools. What actually is in the way in some ways is the complexity of those tools. Like you don't need to italicize the relevant words when you're in the creative production stage of your writing, and that's something that we kind of wanted to limit intentionally, was the ability to format.
How did you know you were getting better? What did you refine as you went along? Because it's sort of subjective, like it's you deciding that it's better. And so was there external feedback from people, or how did you know that it was going in the right direction?
Yeah. So at the beginning, so the first show I played, I was opening for my dad's lecture in Ottawa, and it was at the Canadian Tire Centre in Ottawa. So my first show was at an arena.
Huge.
In Ottawa, and there was 6,000 people there. So that was just nerves, right? Like I was pretty sure I remembered the songs, but that was just like, oh my God, I'm, the show I played before that. So I was in a band from like 2017 to 2020, and it was basically just like we were writing music, but it was a practice band. We didn't put out any records or anything. but we were just kind of starting to put together some shows around Toronto in like early 2020. We were like, I was starting to make connections with some bars and stuff, and we were going to play some consistent shows. And one of the first shows that I had set up was at this bar on the Danforth in Toronto, and it was on March 15th, 2020. I think March 14th, 2020. And so COVID was just like,
Oh yeah.
everyone that week, it was like that week of March, it was like the second week of March, everyone was like, I think the country is going to shut down. And I was like,
What?
that couldn't happen. What are you talking about? And so anyway, my band was going to play at this bar, and they all kind of all backed out at the last second because they were worried about COVID. And, you know, fair enough. They were kind of right in some ways. But I was like, psh. And so I did the show by myself.
Oh.
But like no one showed up because everyone was too afraid and stayed home. And so I think I played to like 10 people in this. It was a huge bar, and like it was like called the Louis Cypher Bar. It's like this brew house on Danforth. So I played a solo show there, and there were probably 10 people. And so the next show I played 3 years later was to 6,000 people in a stadium. So it was quite different in terms of the pressure that was. But no, luckily that I did remember the songs, and the performance went well, and I was quite pleased with it, and it was fun. And so I was like, okay, that's good, because that got like that nerves out of the way. I wasn't even thinking about the details of the songs for that first performance, because it was really all about kind of proving to myself that I could do it at all. So that was good. And then I played a couple more. And in my third show in Hamilton, I actually did forget part of a song. And so that was interesting. That was another development, I guess, for me. It sounds like a setback, but I was like 4 songs in or something, and I was like 98% done this song by Hank Williams, the Lovesick Blues, and I just kind of forgot the last 3 chords. And I was like trying to find them, and I tried to find them for a while, like while trying to continue the song, and I just couldn't find them, and so I was like, psh. So I just ended the song and then just carried on. But like that proved to me that making a mistake in that context didn't really matter. Like the audience most audiences are not particularly judgmental, especially, well, I mean, the context that I was playing, and I was opening, that removes some pressure. And you know, it's just kind of a bonus or an extra, depending on how you think about it, that, you know, an opening act, you're not on the ticket. It doesn't, if you screw up, it's just part of it. And also people are just generally pretty forgiving with people who are performing in some context like that. And so that kind of was another element that kind of took some pressure off me. It's like, okay, well, if I screw up remembering the songs, first of all, it didn't really bother me on stage, and the rest of the set went fine. I was able to recover in a good enough way that it wasn't a disaster in any way. And so that was another proof to me. And then the next show I did in Detroit, which was really cool, that was at the Fox Theater in Detroit, which is like this huge 1920s venue that's like, it's like red and extremely ornate throughout it, and like all the way up the staircases, it's covered in like famous people's signatures, like really famous people played, like Elvis played on that stage.
Whoa.
Yeah, so,
okay.
And like every other famous musician also was playing that stage. It was crazy, the list of people. It was like Frank Sinatra and like Dean Martin and then, you know, modern, like, anyway, just like the list goes on and on at that
Justin
theater.
Bieber and then you.
Yeah, exactly. So the hallway is covered in signatures, and I signed my name on like a pen, so you can't really see it because I didn't have like a marker. But I wanted my name on the wall as well. And anyway, so that show went very well, because I think that messing up the night before kind of proved to me that I didn't have to be as worried about that particular part of it. I could focus more on enjoying the process, and I also kind of practiced a little bit more of that song and was a little more confident with it. So after that, I think that I was able to start focusing on the details. Also, my dad gives exceptional notes. He's a very attentive listener to like everyone. So the people that are on tour with him, like my mom often opens the shows and gives a 10-minute talk or something, and he's always like he very carefully listens and offers a lot of constructive feedback, like right afterwards or after the show, and he's very good at supporting the people around him and making sure that they're doing the best job that they can and that they want to do. So he was really useful, and he gave me good notes about what to do, slowing down, not in the music, but between the songs. Like, I think that because I'm not a super comfortable performer, or not even uncomfortable, but not a super experienced performer, I had a tendency to like thank the audience quickly. Like after I finish the song, like I've done the song, I should thank the audience now. But if the audience is clapping, you want to give them more space than it feels appropriate to. And that was kind of a hard thing to get used to. And so it probably took me until like the very end to get used to that particular skill, I guess, the skill of being patient, not doing very much on the stage, right? Like giving that kind of silence, or not 100% silent, because I would usually continue to noodle on the guitar or something, but not be mid-performance anyway. And so that was a big step, and it kind of reduces the pressure and makes the show feel a little more natural if you're patient between the pieces. And improving my like just kind of stage presence generally, and like looking at people in the audience and interacting with them, not in a major way, but just having the comfort and presence to be able to do that. And so that's, yeah, I would say by the like my 10th or 11th show, that was becoming much more natural. And by the end, I was feeling like just excited to go on the stage, and then able to experiment a little bit while I was on the stage and not have to worry about the details, and just kind of let it happen somewhat naturally. So it was a very good learning experience. I mean, not that you can like replicate that learning. It's a very uncommon opportunity as well to be able to play as an amateur musician to that many people. But certainly I didn't take it for granted.
Well, and that's all. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's all you can do, right?
Yeah.
Is if you're presented with something, take it on. I mean, and you really went for it.
Yeah,
And
it was
fully.
cool. And I was very, very scared. Not as much once I had prepared and like had my songs. Like, okay, I can play my songs. That'll be fine. But it was quite an intimidating thing to agree to, for sure.
Yeah, but that's the only way that you can get comfortable, like you said, right? This repetition idea of, okay,
Yeah.
you have to do the thing.
And you also have to have a goal, and hopefully a relatively, an attainable goal, but something that's beyond your current capability in some way. And then you have to work very hard to be able to do a good job at that. Like you should choose things that if you work very hard, then you can do it, but you should only choose something that has that as a requirement, right? Like you know that you couldn't just go ahead and do it now. And so you should be nervous. You should be like, oh no, this is like, I've put myself in a situation where I have to work for an extended period of time to be able to live up to this obligation that I've made for myself. But yeah, I always thought that I was really bad at remembering how to play songs, because like how I play the guitar and how I've learned to play the guitar and how I do it in my living room or on the piano or whatever I'm playing is like I have like my phone and I like read the chords and experiment and just play it, and I don't need to remember the song because why? It doesn't matter if I remember it or not. But it turns out I'm not that bad at that. Like, it's just I didn't have a lot of reason to remember the songs. Like, there was never pressure to learn and never a reason to memorize. And so now I feel a little bit more like it's not a skill I don't have, but more just something that I need to set a goal for, and then I can probably do it. Not as well as some people. I have a friend who remembers like anything. Like you can give him like a sheet, like a script, and he'll just like read it, and then he can like do it. So that's a skill that I would really like to have. I don't have that skill, but I can at least work hard and memorize stuff.
Yeah, but I think that's an admirable trait, because if something comes easily to you, right, then you have a different appreciation for it. I think that it's meaningful because you had to work at it.
Yeah,
in a
for
sense.
sure.
Like if you just could read it and do it, it's like, oh yeah, man, I could just read this thing and that's fine. You wouldn't have the same level of appreciation either. Like it wouldn't have
or
been
the same level of growth in that way, for sure. Yeah.
So for that, and I mean also recording your music too, that's a whole thing. How did that go? Because that's a whole different skill set of being in the studio and
Yeah. So I did that. I recorded my EP. It's called Sight. It's on Spotify. But I recorded that in 2019, I think. And I had a bunch of songs that I'd written that were, I would say like 90% done, whatever that means. They were complete ideas anyway, and they were complete demos. And I had them for quite a while, some of them. Like I'd written some of them in 2017 and some of them in 2018, and some of them I had started a very, very long time ago and kind of only turned into a polished idea in the last few years, but they were old ideas for me. And basically I just thought I could probably turn them into something, and that it would be interesting to try to use my music to create an actual, not a product, but a creation, I guess, that could be shared in a kind of a more wide, broad way. And so my dad actually bought me some studio time, was how it worked, and he connected me with he was recording the audiobook for 12 Rules for Life, I think, his first new book. And he connected me with the producer who had worked at the recording studio, did that, and he connected me with a different producer, and I worked with him, and he set me up with a few studio musicians, and we spent 2 days in the studio and recorded these 3 songs. And studio musicians are really good. Like it's actually like, I mean, that I wouldn't say that most people have, once again, this, like, it was a little easier for me than it would be for some people to do, because I mean, studio musicians are really good musicians, like, and so you tell them the song and they can play it. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, you know, we had an excellent drummer and a really, really good guitarist and a fantastic bass player, and so and then I played the guitar and sang on the tracks, and so that was very, very cool. We got the recordings done in, I think, 1 day, and then I came in and did some additional tracks and stuff the next day by myself, and then spent quite a while with the producer in the studio, kind of filling it out with different instruments. Like, we had a cello in one song, and I did a lot of like backup vocals at a different studio, a smaller studio, and it just kind of worked away at them until they were ready to go. And then I hired someone off of I can't remember the site, but like something like Upwork, like some random site, to do the album artwork, and he did an awesome job. It was like, that was really cool. I really enjoyed the album artwork that I ended up getting for that, and so that was a really cool part of it. And then I had to learn how to actually like put it on Spotify and all the places that it has to go. So I had to learn the websites that you do. That's actually not that complicated once you know how to do it. But
Spotify's pretty accessible.
yeah, it is.
Shockingly.
And you can like use DistroKid is the one I used, but you can use it, and all you have to do is upload your music. It's pretty. I don't think there's a free option, but it's quite inexpensive. Like, it's not expensive at all, and they end up, and you just get it on all the streaming platforms.
Yeah. Well, like the podcast too.
Yeah, it's the same. It's about as easy as doing a podcast. It's a little harder than putting a podcast up, but it's in the same realm of technical difficulty. And so that was a good thing to know how to do. And then it was just a matter of being brave enough to,
well, and that's
to actually release it.
Yeah, that's the question, right? Because you said letting go. I mean, definitely for my book, it was one of those things where I never felt done. I mean, I still, I mean, it's not done. It's like this living, breathing thing that never ends.
Yeah, that's
somehow.
art, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
how?
Yeah, have you read The Creative Act? It's this new book that Rick Rubin just came out with. Do you know who Rick Rubin is? He's a music producer. He's produced like, I don't know, 100 really popular and impressive albums. Like, he worked with the Beastie Boys in the 90s, and he's worked with like, oh man, like the list goes on and on. He's one of the most influential music producers of the modern era. Anyway, he wrote this book called The Creative Act, and it just came out, and it's really good. And you should listen to the audiobook, because he's got like a really deep, and like, he sounds like Mufasa. Like, very, very calming and nice voice. But anyway, the book was fantastic, and he talks about kind of first of all, his creativity philosophy and how he thinks about it. And he's quite a spiritual thinker. Like, he talks about kind of the whole creative process and how he thinks it works. And anyway, there's a part of it that's talking about when you decide the work is finished. Like, when do you let go and decide? And, my dad always said that you work on a piece of writing until the changes that you make it worse. And that's pretty good, but it assumes that you can tell.
Yeah.
Which is hard. It's hard to know whether you're making it worse or better, and it's hard to know that all sorts of things. And I think that, anyway, Rick Rubin in this book had some good advice about that. I think that, first of all, he said that you can work so long on a piece of work, on a piece of art, that first of all, it can lose its context, right? Because art is created within a time and a place, and if you iterate it on too long, then you lose your connection with when it was written and why it was written, and so you don't want to work on it too long, even if you certainly don't want to work on it for so long that you lose the drive that initiated the project, because then you'll change it in some fundamental way, because the way that you are iterating will change, because you'll have different goals than you had at the beginning of the project, and so then it'll kind of be split in some way. So that was, I thought, very interesting feedback, or I guess from that book. And he just has a whole lot of, it's a really good, I would definitely recommend it to any creative person, anyone who does art or writing or anything that has the creative process involved. Very, very cool guy. So.
Well, yeah. Why are you creating this? I think that's a powerful question to keep your eye on the aim.
Yeah.
Because a song, let's say if it's about a certain point in your life, it had a certain feeling and sentiment that you're trying to convey, and then from that, if you're not in that sentiment anymore and you've moved on, like you said, then it's split and you're not really capturing the feeling.
And sometimes you don't even know exactly what you're trying to create, right? And so it's just tied up in the context of what's going on, and you don't have a real connection to be able to express what it's about, right? Like I've written lots of songs that are poems, maybe some of them aren't full songs yet, but I don't exactly know what they're about, They're about something, and they're certainly about something that I was expressing, but if you asked me whether they had an aim, I would say no, they certainly don't have an aim. Their aim was an expression of whatever I was feeling creatively at that time. But if I go back and rewrite it now, it might be the same song, but I won't be connecting with the same creative source that I had at that moment. And so it's nice to be able to, if you can, focus on one project at a time and actually bring it to completion, because then you're capturing that creative source, right, and actually bringing it to its proper place. But he also says you should never do that unless you're motivated by that work in the moment. So maybe that's a contradictory piece of advice, but
but what is that creative source? Because that's interesting. Like how do you tap into that, or what's your feeling around that? Because you can't just use motivation or the feeling, but there is this kind of source of things that you have to. It's there all the time, but you gotta kind of.
Who knows what it is? Right? I think that's the big question. What is that? But certainly, I think that most people agree, and certainly it'd be hard to find an artist that didn't agree. I think that they get inspiration from something that isn't totally within them. Right? It's something from. It's the world, it's nature, it's being, it's, God, whatever it is. It's something that we can connect to that's part of everything else. And it's how you draw inspiration. And so I think that, there's all sorts of different ways that people connect with that, right? Being out in nature is certainly a good one. Looking at other art and listening to music or doing that is a great way to do it. Just some people just sitting in a room empty, right? Really, I think it really depends on the person and how they best connect with it. Yeah, I find nature very effective, like sitting outside, and I find that and isolation. Like I find it difficult to create if I'm not alone in some isolated place. But ideally, it's somewhere beautiful. That helps,
Yeah.
but. Some people aren't like that at all. Like some of the great writers, write in such a dark closet, right?
Well, sensory deprivation. I mean,
that can work too, right? Yeah.
Well, you're really in your own thoughts and your own feelings then.
Right.
Sure. So, okay, what's next on the music front then? You've got that EP, and you did this amazing tour with lots of great people listening. Now, what's next?
Yeah. So now I've kind of proven to myself that I can do both of those things, and so I was able to put together an album. It was a short album, but it was pretty well received. People are pretty happy with the music, and I was pretty happy with it. And then I have now performed live in a fairly meaningful setting, and I think that I did a decent job of that, and people are pretty happy with it. And so I'm still trying to figure out exactly what I'm doing. I have about 10 or 12 songs that I've written, and so if I can carve out the time, I'd like to put together a full-length album at some point in the next year. I think my goal at the beginning of the year is to do it this year.
Yeah.
I don't know, this year is like slipping away. I know it's only 3 months, but it feels like it's slipping away. So we'll see if I can get it done this year, but I'd like to. In this office space that we're getting for SA, we're actually, my wife and I are putting a little music studio and art studio underneath it. it's got a main floor, and then it's got like 2 little basement rooms that have some studio space. So I'm hoping that having the space, because right now in our house, I think since I had kids, actually, I haven't had a lot of space to work creatively, because first we lived in a pretty small house and it was COVID, and so we were always home and everyone was always home, and we have a dog and we have a kid, and when it was like nighttime, I had to be quiet. And when it's nap time, I had to be quiet, and it's always nighttime or nap time. So I think having a space outside of the house is going to be quite, that should help a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think putting together an album would be good. I'd like to find another band, I think, or at least collaborators in Toronto, ideally, to play with again. I was thinking of, there's like these 3 or 4 bars in my neighborhood that have live music frequently, so I was thinking of approaching one of them and just seeing if I could play there once a week, and just to kind of keep that skill building, because I know that what the Beatles do, they when they were becoming a band in like the late 50s and early 60s, they played in Hamburg, and Hamburg had this famous strip at that time where it was just, I think it was like 10, I don't know how many music venues, a whole bunch of music venues in one strip, and it was just constant live music. And so bands would play like 8-hour sets. And so the Beatles played there frequently. They would go to Hamburg and they would play 8-hour shows, and they would just play all day.
Wow.
And so they played like thousands and thousands of hours of live shows before they became super famous. And so, they were famous for their live shows, except for that, like, they were too famous for their live shows. They had to stop doing them. But it's definitely, that's really the only way to become a good performer, is to do it frequently, no matter what the venue is. Like, it's really a practice thing and a comfort thing. So I'd like to continue building that comfort as well. And yeah, so those are some goals. I like to write tiny little songs for my kids too while they're eating.
Aww.
And doing other things. So my son, who's 3, really likes that. He asks me to write him like an eating song or a peeing song or whatever he's doing. So I'm keeping my songwriting chops up to snuff as well while
he'll critique. He'll keep you in line.
Yeah. You make sure they're at least funny. At the minimum, they have to be funny. Their melody doesn't have to be super catchy, but yeah.
So that's interesting, because there's this thread with essay and practicing to write, and how you need the repetition and refinement, and then music, it's sort of this similar idea of, okay, you need repetition in the right environment. So if you're recording, you need to do the studio thing more than once or multiple times, and same with shows. So it's sort of this, I don't know, I'm getting this thread of, okay, repetition and putting yourself in the right context repeatedly, and that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
You have to practice whatever it is you want to be good at, and so essay or music seems to be similar. And then now you've brought up the kids piece, so I'm definitely...
You got to practice with them too. They don't start out perfect.
Yeah.
So yeah, and to connect essay to it a little bit, I actually use essay for my music writing sometimes. Not always. Sometimes I scribble it on a notepad, or just write it in my head and record it on like my phone or something. But essay, the like rewrite tool, is really, really good for rewriting lines of a song, because certainly when you're writing a song that rhymes, often what you do is you switch up the rhyme, and you can adjust the story a little bit and creating, like, being able to create little variations in each sentence or each phrase in the song actually turns out to be a really useful songwriting technique. So I use it for my lyrics really frequently. I'm actually probably going to record, one of my marketing plans for essay is to record myself writing a song on the platform, and then I'll play the song afterwards. On like YouTube or something. So that's one of my little plans that I haven't been able to carve out the time for yet. But
that's it's a great plan, because I think you're pointing to something really important, which is, okay, you're writing. It's not just writing. Writing's important in and of itself, but it's actually, you can bring that to life with the sermons that you're talking about. Some of the people use them to speak the sermons, or you're using it to create music. So it's not just this piece of writing that stays in the app and kind of doesn't have a life, or doesn't, but you're bringing it into the world. Yeah, there's this transformation that happens there somehow that's really powerful.
Right, and that's actually that's really tied into the philosophy of the program generally, is that the writing that you do, like any writing, regardless of whether you actually perform it in any way, like sermon or song or performance or projects at school or whatever it is, you don't actually have to perform it to have that sort of impact in your life, right? All you have to do is write it down. as soon as you write something down and spend time with it and edit it, and you make it a part of who you are, whether you know it or not. And so part of the philosophy of the program is that, you should write about things that you care about, and you should ensure that the things that you're writing about match your ethics and the goals that you have for yourself. And because, spending time writing, that's a real process. It shapes your brain and the way that it works and the language it uses and the ideas that it thinks are important. And so it's certainly not a process to take lightly.
Yeah. Well, and useful in so many different contexts. Like even just so many people have journals.
Right.
And I think if they would put it in there and then be able to sort of have the journal free write, but then organize what's happened in their journal, like it just seems like you could use it personally too, just to sort yourself out.
For sure. We have quite a few users who use it just like exactly for that, just for journaling and for like free writing.
Yeah.
Like they'll just, I think actually our most active user, we talked to him once, we were doing kind of a user test to see what our users wanted for file organization. It was for this feature that we're about to release. And we talked to him, and he basically used it as a free writing platform. So he would just spend like an hour a day writing about whatever came to mind. And so he had like 500 documents on that. It was just like full of whatever.
His whole brain is in.
Yes, exactly. Right. And that's a good practice too. I think that like, I don't do that, but there's a lot of benefits in just getting your thoughts on paper, and even better if you organize them afterwards. But getting them on paper is a good start.
Sure. Well, you untangle them definitely. Like in my sessions, I mean, people come and everything's just jumbled up, and if they can speak it out, it's a similar idea where they're getting it in order by speaking.
For sure,
so
it's exactly the same process. Yeah. It's easier when you're writing because you can iterate easier when you're writing. But speaking is a lot more natural for some people too, and writing is harder. So yeah, certainly talking to someone is a fantastic way of doing exactly the same thing, of sorting out your ideas and improving them, and yeah, it's just more transient, I guess.
Right, because you need a transcript or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then so you mentioned your kids too, so I'm definitely curious how that has, changed everything, obviously. But how has it been to kind of, you've got this new business that takes a lot of time, and new businesses are babies and it's this creation that takes so much, and then there's this musical side, but then family is obviously important.
Yeah. Well, we've got a lot going on in our house for sure.
Yeah.
Like I launched Essay the week after my daughter was born.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Which we just kind of like, it wasn't even, I wouldn't have necessarily planned it that way. I didn't plan it that way. It was just ready to launch. And it's like, well, I'm not going to wait. We've waited for 2 years already. It's like, if it's ready to launch, we're going to launch it now. So that was weird because, it's like having this new business it's an extremely intimate endeavor in a way, right? So it's been busy. It's like you got to be paying very close attention to the kids and to the business. And I work from home, and until I have, at least for the whole duration of this project so far. So I've been, I've had to kind of like sequester my way myself in a corner and like be working away on this. But my wife has done a lot of. She's very good at taking care of kids, and she loves it, and it's a dream of hers to be a mother, and so that worked out very well. And we knew that, of course, when we decided to get married and have kids, that was something that she was really motivated to do, and I always wanted kids too, but I was also less confident in my ability to focus a lot on infant care. That was like, it doesn't come super naturally to me.
No, most men, I hear that from men, right? That first, until they're sort of walking or talking, it's kind of like...
Until 1 is hard. Like, even, 2 is even easier. The more that, you can connect with the kid through play, I think that's when it gets easier for a lot of men. Not all men. Like, some men are a lot more comfortable with infants. Like, I have friends that are, like they don't have kids, and when they pick up a baby, they look more natural with a baby than I do. And it's like, wow, why? Because I have a lot more practice. Like I've held a lot of babies now, or at least the same ones a lot of times. And but yeah, I don't know what it is, but it just comes more naturally to some people, I guess. So that's been good that my wife and I have a decent balance in terms of interest in caring for really young kids. By the time my daughter was born, my son was almost 2, and then we bonded a lot at that time, because when the second kid is born, then usually the second parent hangs out with the first kid.
Yeah.
Like that's when the father really takes a more primary care role usually. So that was cool for me, because now me and my son are extremely close, and he talks about me all the time.
Yeah.
Sings little songs about me, and I sing little songs about him, and it's a whole thing. So that's good. No, it's been it's crazy. It's a busy life. It's busy. It's very busy to have kids and do anything.
Sure.
It's busy to have kids and try to leave the house. It's like, so it's definitely busy to run a business and have kids, and we have a dog, but we're lucky in some ways too. We have a house, and we have help. We have an au pair, and that helps a lot. And soon we'll be putting our toddler in preschool, and so then my wife will have a little more freedom, because she's been caring full time for our daughter for the last 11 months. So
Yeah. Well, and your son before that. And how do you make that decision? Because I think that's choosing education is such a big, I don't even know if we have time to unpack all of that, but just how do you pick schooling? I went to Montessori as a kid, and I loved that, and I found that to just be so different from the public school I went to.
Yeah.
So how do you make that choice?
Oh, it's hard, right? It's hard. That is a difficult thing. I mean, for preschool, we didn't spend we don't have a lot of time to make those decisions, and so we didn't spend a lot of time making decisions. We looked up a whole bunch online. Basically, Montessori and things that were similar to Montessori for preschool was the area that we looked in, because that just kind of fits. First of all, we know that it's a very tried and true technique, and so we were pretty comfortable with that. And we ended up going actually with I can't remember the actual philosophy of teaching that the one we chose, but it's very close to our house. We went there and we toured it, and our son had a great time, and they have a beautiful outdoor space, and they do it's similar to Montessori in some ways, and in some ways it has a different philosophy, but it's basically child-directed learning, and learning and child-specific development. So paying attention to the child and the way that they're developing, and the way that and what they need in order to feel confident in themselves. And these kids are 3, right? What they need is to be able to express themselves enough in all the right ways so that they can start to learn.
Yeah.
So that was that philosophy kind of fit with how we're kind of parenting at home. It's in order to teach a child to be in the world in some way that they can actually improve and learn, they have to be in a reasonably good state of mind. You can't learn to do a new skill if you have to pee and you don't want to. That's that's not going to happen. If you're hungry, no. If you're tired, no. So you have to as with toddlers, you have to teach them to deal with those really, really primary things first, and that's complicated. That's very complicated things to learn. So I felt when we talked to this school, they had a very similar philosophy to us as parents, and it's a small school. I think they only have I don't know how many kids, but it's run out of a house and stuff, so it's small and well done. So in terms of what we're gonna do for actual school, we still have not figured that out yet. That is a way bigger can of worms, I feel.
Yeah. We don't have to tackle that
We're just
today.
pretending that we're not gonna do. I don't know what we're gonna do. Maybe we'll just keep them in. I don't know. Educate them online. I don't know.
Well, it goes back to essay in a sense too, because education is just changing so much. There's so much information online that you can have.
Yeah.
Self-directed learning or at home, or just I see that changing
that
much.
is definitely going to be a thing, right? I worked with before I was working on essay, I worked with this school down in Austin called Acton, the Acton Academy. I don't know if you're probably familiar with it. Anyway, I know the guy who runs that, and we actually ran a program at his MBA program that was in Austin as well. It was called the Peterson MBA. It was a while ago. Anyway, I worked with him some in his schools and kind of saw how they worked, and he offered to help us start one of those schools in Toronto, which we don't really have time to do, but they're very cool
just start
schools.
a school. Just start your own school, Julian.
Yeah, I know. Well,
put it in the building, the
we'll
office.
put it in the building, and we'll just spend a couple hours teaching kids, and yeah. It'd be nice to be able to do everything, but but that sort of self-directed learning is certainly becoming an easier reality because of the quality of educational content that exists. Like teaching math, for instance, it's like, really, you shouldn't teach math. You should really let them use Khan Academy online and be there as like a guide, basically.
Yeah.
Like it really is, it makes the most sense. I liked some math. Like I really liked math until like grade 7. Like I really liked early math, like arithmetic and that sort of, I think that they teach that well because most adults are pretty good at arithmetic, and especially people who teach math, they like,
know
they can do
that.
that. Like
Yeah.
but once you get into more abstract mathematical concepts, I think that the quality of teaching usually goes down, of course. And so for at least that, like for even when it becomes like algebra and calculus and the things that you get in a little bit higher levels of grade school, math is like, that should probably be done online because you get the best teachers, or at least like things that have been iterated over so many times and tried and tested, and like games that keep the kids entertained and methods that have been proven. And it's like, for math, you probably use that. At least if we don't use that directly in my kids' math education, will almost certainly have them do it outside of school because it would be crazy not to. Yeah, and then for the other subjects, who knows? I don't know how we're going to do it. We'll have to look to see if the public schools are doing. I mean, public schools in Toronto have been historically very good. Like I had a great experience in my public schooling, but that was 20 years ago, and things have changed somewhat in that area.
Yeah.
And so it's
Wild
hard
to say that it's 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, not 20 years ago since I graduated. It's only 10 years ago since I graduated, but 20 years ago since I was in like the thick of grade school. So.
But just interesting how quickly it has shifted, because I've noticed,
really
I've
has,
got
yeah.
younger siblings in the school system now,
Mm-hmm.
and it just feels like it's a totally different world than
Yeah.
and that's not that long ago.
It isn't that long ago at all.
And I
it's,
feel-
it's crazy how much that, I mean, I don't have kids in the schools right now, so like it's all hearsay for me, but like from what I hear, it's like there's a lot of, it's changed from a lot more politics and a lot more, and the curriculum has just changed in a way that maybe isn't about learning.
Well, yeah, or what are you learning? Maybe it's not about thinking,
Right,
in
maybe
a
not about
sense,
thinking,
like,
yeah.
and schools were, I guess, you had to memorize things, then do tests, and so there was this sort of regurgitation component already when we were in school, but yeah, it's shifted, and I think this self-directed model that you're talking about and being able to utilize technology for good and research effectively is going to be really important. And
those are just good skills to have in the modern world anyway, right? The ability to, first of all, use a computer effectively.
Yeah.
It's probably not a more useful skill. I mean, who knows what's going to be useful in like 20 years when my kids are entering the workforce, but that's a good bet, is that using computers will be useful in some way. And then being able to self-direct your learning, that is a fantastic skill. That's pretty much the most transferable skill that you can build. It's like the ability to research, the ability to understand when the information you're reading is valid. So, learning those skills from an early age is definitely would come in handy. And just learn to be self-didactic, I think that's the word. Anyway, that'd be a good goal anyway for the education of children, is developing those skills. But at the same time, that doesn't suit every child. Some kids need a lot more hands-on attention when they're learning. It's not, so have to kind of wait and see.
yeah, well, and they'll be different too, because every child has their own, like you said, they have their own things. So your son and daughter will have their own way.
No
too,
doubt, yeah, for sure.
which is so cool. It's so cool to see who they turn into. I think that's just like,
and who they are from the start too. I mean, both my kids are so different, from birth. They were amazingly different. So I always knew that. I knew that people were born kind of who they are.
yeah.
But when you actually have kids, that becomes even more apparent. It's like, oh yeah, you're just like you, and then you are you forever. And you don't really, you undergo transformations of yourself, but like my daughter, she had a strong personality right from not from day one, because day one is they're not even really in the world yet, but from the moment she opened her eyes and started to interact with people, she's had a strong personality that has been evident. And that's crazy, the fact that that's true, because I mean, if we talk about like human development. It's like babies who are that age should really still be in utero. Like they're not really supposed to be out in the world. Their just heads are too big to be. So it's crazy that their personalities already exist in such a serious way.
Yeah. Hey, well, and I think, there's so many ways we could go, but I guess I'm curious about maybe just bits of your childhood. We talked a little bit about Harry Potter, but sort of what are your biggest influences, would you say, growing up, or what kind of shaped you? Because let's say you were you, but then there are all these things in your family and in your life that have happened. So what are some of the biggest guiding forces in your life so far?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few. I mean, like, probably the biggest one from my childhood was the fact that my sister was very sick when I was a kid. And so from the time I was, I don't know, 6 on and off, she was very sick. And so we were in the hospital, and my parents were very occupied with her care, and on and off. Like, she had years that she was quite healthy as a kid, and Michaela and I also had a really good relationship when we were kids. So that was good. But that definitely shaped me to a certain extent, because I would say like I became more independent earlier than I normally would have, and I also became more mature emotionally than I would have, I think, earlier as a result of that, because my family needed me to be emotionally mature. I don't know if they didn't ask it of me. It was just something that I think I noticed when I was young, and I remember kind of feeling this pressure that was not like real pressure. It wasn't like asked of me, like I said, but I think that it's, yeah, so I wouldn't say like I went through a huge emotional transformation when I was a teenager. Like a lot of people do. Almost everybody goes through a huge emotional transformation when they're a teenager. And that didn't really happen to me. Like, I didn't change very much from the time I was like 10 years old till now. Like, I don't really feel like I've undergone a huge emotional transformation during that period of time. I've changed, and in all sorts of countless ways. But I think that I matured emotionally somewhat younger than would have, and that was part of being in a household that had some real trauma that was going on, and like constant. And so that was one of the shaping moments, and that had pros and cons. Like there were, parts of my childhood that I felt maybe I was less, not nurtured, that's the wrong word, but my needs were probably less paid attention to, just as a result of them literally not being as important as other things that were going on. Like I probably would have played more competitive hockey than I did. Obviously it's not that big of a deal, but it was like I kind of had to stop doing that, and maybe I would have done other things as well. So that was one of the things, I guess. And then music was always a huge impact. My dad and my mom both had very eclectic taste in music, and so I was exposed to like every genre on the face of the earth from the time I was very young. And so that was very useful for me, because now I like pretty much every genre of music. Yeah. That's cool. That was something I was listening to. Andrew Huberman talk to Rick Rubin. He was on.
Okay.
They had a podcast together.
That's an interesting match.
Yeah, it was cool. You should listen to that one too. But they were talking about the like foundational years where you like the music that defines you. You often listen to like between 13 and 25, right? Like that. There's like the years
that makes sense.
Yeah, and so, well, if you have kids, that's kind of a good thing to know about having kids. Is like, if you want them to enjoy, I guess, the breadth of music that is available, and the breadth of art that doesn't just happen for music, but like exposing them to a lot of genres when they're younger than that, so that when they hear them during the formative years of when you're kind of developing your identity and developing your relationship with art, is having like the ability and the interest in wider genres, so that you have a more full experience of art and enjoyment of art when you're older. It's kind of a cool gift that you can give kids, is to expose them to a very wide variety of art and stuff when they're young.
Language too.
So,
I think
language
because,
for sure.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting, because okay, your son's 2, and maybe but for me, I learned Croatian and really from when I was born until 4 years old, and I didn't know English until I went to school.
Right.
And that set me up though for all other languages. Like I love, for me, maybe it's also my own inclination, but languages just really come easily to me.
Right.
And so I was exposed to a few languages as a kid, and that transformed my ability
Yeah,
to.
that's huge. What an amazing gift to have. Like, yeah, that is not the case for me at all. I wouldn't say I've spent a ton of time developing that skill set either. So I don't know for sure that it's not something I could do, but certainly it doesn't seem to come super easily to me. And
French wasn't your favorite subject in high school?
No, it definitely wasn't my favorite subject. No. I liked my French teacher, but I didn't like. To be fair, I didn't really like going to school, so that was part of the problem. I liked playing ball hockey in the hallways.
Yeah. No, but that's an important point too, I think, which, like you said earlier, not everyone learns the same way. And so I think it's important to foster that. And if you could, there's a masculine element of being active in sports. And I think you learn so much from sports too, like just team play and the competitive nature of things and how to be a team player and lead a team or like,
for sure.
There's so much there.
Yeah, there's so many hard and soft skills you learn through team sports for sure. Also makes you a lot better, like making friends and having adult relationships too, because making friends as adults is very hard, but it's actually very easy if you play team sports.
Yeah, do you keep up?
Well, if you play on a team, and you've done it your whole life, then you probably are friends with everyone on your team, or at least have relationships with them. And so even if you move to a new city as an adult and you play on a team sport, you will essentially make friends. And it's hard to make friends as an adult, so that's a really good trick to know. Is like, do an activity that is team oriented, and then you'll probably make some friends.
Yeah, that's a good. And I guess, and I told you I'd ask you this one, so we've got to get to it before we go. Just around, I guess, community, and you alluded to this in one of your episodes, and you didn't get to speak it out, so I'd love to go there. Just around, I guess, churches and how to find local communities. So definitely activities is one. Mm-hmm. But what have you found, or have you found anything with your family or even for yourself? Because I'm finding this big need for people to have a sense of community and local community, really in person.
Yeah.
I see you every week. Like, we get together, this beyond family and friends, a bigger group. And I feel the people I'm chatting with regularly that there's a need, and people are really missing that.
It's really disappeared from our culture, right? It might even be the problem of our culture, right? Like the fact that people no longer relate directly with their local communities. It's not a thing anymore. Like I mean, maybe it is. It's not for my generation anyway, and it's like, and maybe for older generations, it's still kind of the case that you have stuff in common with the people who live close to you, but most people don't anymore. They're like, the people that they relate to are, they connect with them on the internet or through school, and they've moved or whatever it is. But like, people's neighbors are not usually the people that they are most connected to in terms of their values.
They might not even know them.
Right.
I mean, how many, right? Like,
right. That's often the case. And not even that. Like, so there's that issue that people are moving around a lot more and have these connections that are virtual connections. But also, like, the media landscape has changed so dramatically that people don't listen to the same media anymore, right? Like, it wasn't that long ago that everyone watched exactly the same everything. Channels, you watch the same programs, you listen to the same music. It was all, so you're very, very connected on a cultural level. And so both that cultural connection has gone in terms of the media landscape, and the local connection has gone. It's really, really difficult to know how to solve that problem, because the media problem isn't going away, and it's also not exactly a problem. It's just different. But people no longer trust their neighbors because of that, right? Like, you can easily trust someone if you understand their values, but you can't assume anyone's values anymore because you don't know anything about what they're listening to or who they are really at all.
Well, and there's so much division as well on sort of polarizing topics that it's like, how can I approach you? There's almost this.
So people are afraid to communicate openly, for sure. It's a real problem. I certainly don't have a solution for it.
You don't? You haven't solved?
I haven't solved that problem, but no, I mean, it is something that we've talked about in my house a fair amount. Is like, how do we improve that for our family? Because you need a community when you're raising kids. And it somewhat comes naturally when the kids are in school, because you get the parent community, but not when your kids are super young. Mm-hmm. So like, we had a weird situation because our son was born in 2020 in May, And so like
In Toronto.
in Toronto. So obviously we didn't have a community.
Yeah.
My mom was around and that was it. And we also like broke the rules and had one other family, like not family, but one other couple that we kind of had in our bubble. And so we saw them like every day for like a year.
Nice. That's
So
nice.
it could have been worse, but certainly that experience and has cemented the need to like, yeah, like build these sorts of traditions that are embedded in the community that you live in, or at least with a group of people that are somewhat in the community you live in. Like people, I think this idea of the nuclear family, I think that I think it's a good idea. Like I think that makes sense. Like that works as a family unit very effectively, but it isn't the end of it. Like the fact that that worked was not because of only the fact that it was that certain group of as a mother and a father and kids. It's like no, like that existed in this wider community of people who were supporting that, and that is very absent, I think, in a lot of places, and it's hard to rebuild that. I mean, certainly, I think that on that other podcast I was talking about. I think my wife and I were talking about how to build a spiritual community or a religious community, and how it's difficult to know exactly where to start, and we have not solved that problem.
Just put it beside the school. You've got the school, now
let's
you
start
need
church and school, and why not be the same place? But but we've started to like do small things in our like household and decide on like traditional elements of our like just day-to-day traditions that have been helpful, like having like a weekly dinner that's the same, let's say, and so a Sunday dinner that's the same. And we also have an au pair from Austria, and so we've asked her what her family's traditions are, and try, because in North America our cultural traditions are so barren that that it's hard to know what to do with yourself if you're trying to kind of build traditions or figure out what they are. So we kind of asked her what they are, and so at Christmas, like we use some of the Austrian traditions to kind of build some family traditions there. So I don't know, it's kind of a slow process, but something to work on, I guess, as you build a family and try to.
Well, I've noticed, I mean, being in Austin now, because, Texas isn't the Bible Belt. And so I do notice a real difference between being down there, and church is still the thing.
It's still
Whereas,
the center of the community, yeah.
it is. And people go, and families, young, and, it's not just, I find that the average age of people at a church in Toronto, it's just.
He's old. He's like really old. Like we went to a church over Christmas, like. And they was like the average age was like 70. Like it's not like it's 40. It's 70.
And so and the churches there I think are really working to.
Right.
And so I've been testing that and seeing because one we went to and it had like the sermon was on a screen. So it was like a recorded. And that felt
that's
odd.
weird.
That felt weird. I'm like, I want the person.
Yeah.
So that was too far technologically,
definitely,
right?
Yeah.
It's like, so trying to find kind of the best way to revitalize how the message is being shared and the community's being built, but then keeping those values. And it's definitely an interesting, but I think it's really alive there.
Right. That makes sense. I can understand that, but yeah, definitely not the case here. Definitely different, and of course it is. There's the Christian tradition certainly is not as foundational here as it is in Texas. It's like maybe it was foundational, but it's there's so many cultures in Toronto. It's part of the beauty of Toronto, but it's also part of the difficulty in what's your community here? I don't know.
Well, but I think the Christian, what's interesting is though, if I speak with friends that are Jewish or Hindu or Muslim, I do find that those communities, for whatever reason, have been able to continue those traditions somehow, or they're still quite tight knit. And I'm not sure what it is, but I went to an Anglican all girls school, and we had our choir in the church, and we had some of those traditions, but somehow I don't know what it is about the Christian tradition that's been.
Yeah, it's weird.
Because, I've got Hindu friends that it's like, no, they're keeping up with holidays and family.
There's a level of orthodoxy in both like Judaism and Islam that we don't have in Christianity, in most sects of Christianity. It's like the tradition was stripped out on purpose to make it more accessible and spread more easily. And that worked, but it also had other effects.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So do you go back to Orthodox? Like, do you make it? That's the, how do you?
I don't know, right? Because it's hard to make that choice. It's hard to I don't know. It's a good question. It's something we've been thinking about. Is like, how do you bring back sort of the important traditional elements of a religion because there's value, and there's value in the dogma, and there's also value in the traditions, and along with the spirituality. Like it's not just about spirituality. I think that's something that I didn't understand until fairly recently, that like the traditions around religion are actually, in a way, they're not maybe more important than the beliefs, but they're of similar importance regardless. And yeah, those are hard to rebuild, and they're hard to connect with. You can connect with the beliefs a lot easier because you can read a book and you can think about them, and that's more of a personal relationship with God or with nature or with whatever you want to communicate with. But the tradition, you can't really do that by yourself. You have to build a community, and you have to do it. So I don't know. Work in progress.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I just admire that you're doing that on a family level, I think. And just because it starts there.
Yeah.
And that you're thinking about it is a huge thing. And my husband and I are thinking about it too.
I think probably a lot of young families are thinking about it.
Well, and that's what grips me. And I think, okay, well, if I'm thinking about it and you're thinking about it, and so we're all thinking about it in these kind of divided. It's like so.
Isolated, think about it. Yeah.
So we need, you need, yes, the physical space, but also just a means of people coming together, because I mentioned it in my book, and I feel when you mention God, it's already like, oh, whoa, wait, what do you, even saying God seems to be confrontational in some sense. And so again, how do you bring this up and have the discussion?
It's an interesting thing, and it's part of the reason why I think my dad's description of God has been, his non-description of God in a way has been so interesting to so many people, is because people are afraid of that word, and they also have a concept of God that's very basic, right? It's shallow, I guess, right? And like, I don't know, if you read old Christian texts, like the concept of God it's not clear. Like it's very complicated, and like it doesn't have to be basic, and it really can be whatever it can be what you think it is, because the relationship between a person and God it's the relationship that matters. It's not what they say the relationship is, or how, if they can articulate it in a meaningful way. And so I think that the way that my dad talks about it in more of a psychological way has helped people kind of start to think about it anyway, and start to not treat it as just a kind of a dated idea, which I think that certainly my generation was starting to think that way a lot. But I've heard that that's not the case for the younger generations, that there's actually somewhat of a resurgence in Christianity. I don't know if that's the case.
TikTok.
That's just what I've heard.
TikTok and church.
Yeah, you never know what TikTok's going to do, right? Yeah. Yeah, but Christianity is very big in China, so who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. So, and that is interesting too, because again, Austin, I do feel that there's that presence, and so it's very much so dependent on the place, and so how absolutely. Canada or Toronto or bigger cities maybe feel like they've gone. Sure.
They're more secular. Yeah.
Has that always been the case?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Huh. Well, hey, we might not solve that.
No, we'll talk about this particular podcast. Maybe next time.
Well, you already have a plan, though. You've got a building, you've got a church, now there's a school, there's a recording studio. Like
it sounds like way too many things. Yeah.
All in one spot, though. It's gonna be a good.
Yeah.
I like it.
A corner. Just a corner that's a church, and a corner that's a
I like it.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I think that's a solid place to wrap up.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's meant so much to me to just get to learn more about you.
It was a pleasure having a chat, and thank you very much for the invitation.